Welcome to Fault Lines/CTRL+F, a special series live at the Reagan National Defense Forum. My name is Jessica Jones, NSI Senior Fellow, and I'm joined today by my favorite founder and executive director, Jamil Jaffer. As you guys know, we're recording here at Reagan National Defense Forum, and we've got a new series titled Modern Defense, Allies, Innovation, and the Future of Defense. We're building on RNDF's overarching theme of restoring deterrence with peace through strength, and we're talking to the coolest founders, technologists, investors, and policymakers. So we're really excited. On this special episode, we're sitting down with Mina Faltas, the founder and chief investment officer of Washington Harbour Partners. He's held numerous positions in the investment field, bringing almost 25 years of experience to the conversation today. We're going to dig a little more into that. But for the first time ever from RNDF, we actually have two guests. We have also our favorite, Dmitri Alperovitch, chairman of Silverado Policy Accelerator, a geopolitics think tank in D.C., co-founder and former chief technology officer at CrowdStrike, and our favorite NSI advisory board member joining us as well. Okay, let's...
I thought it was the most important.
Oh, sorry. Favorite and most important NSI advisory board member. We like it. Pipe in whenever you want to. We're going to have a fun one. We're post-lunch here at RNDF, so I think our sugar is running high. So it should be a good conversation.
No falling asleep.
No falling asleep. Okay, so for the first question, kind of an easy one. So our audience, we get a lot of policymakers, we get technologists, some founders. We don't get as many investors, in particular, not even in the defense tech space. So you're kind of one of our first major voices. So I'd love to hear about your move and pivot into defense tech investment. What brought you here? How has the experience been?
Fantastic. So thanks for having me today. So there's been actually no move or pivot. I actually learned defense 25 years ago as a mergers and acquisitions analyst at JP Morgan, in the late 1990s. And during that period, I did mergers and acquisitions in not only the commercial software space, but the commercial services space and the government services space. So that's when I originally learned defense. What I've observed for the last 25 years is that the Fortune 500 has bought and has access to the most modern, automated, commercial, top-notch technologies, and typically the U.S. government and the taxpayer gets it on an 8 to 10-year lag. That's a tragedy, and that's almost insulting to the balance sheet of the U.S. taxpayer. So I've taken it upon as my mission to bring the best technologies to the U.S. government customer and to close that 10-year gap as quickly as possible.
What do you think the gap's down now to?
Oh,
8 to 10 too.
That's really hard to say. I think it depends on the sector and it depends on the capability. But we're trying to close gaps across cyber, across space, across electronic warfare, across digital modernization and AI, manufacturing, nuclear technologies. There are a lot of gaps.
So, Mina, tell us about how you see the current market, right? Defense tech has gotten super hot recently, got a ton of new investors coming in. JP Morgan just committed, your former employer committed $1.5 trillion over 10 years, at least $10 billion in venture-type funding. Why is defense tech so hot now? I mean, you've been in it for 25 years. Why is it hot now? Is this thing real? Will the returns come, or is it a fad? Is the bubble going to pop?
I don't think of it in terms of hot or not hot. I think that we're at a massive turning point right now. The way that the U.S. government bought technology for the last 20 or 30 years is over. The government used to buy large, exquisite, expensive, vulnerable, customized, non-interoperable, non-scalable technologies and solutions. And frankly, they bought them from a very limited number of prime contractors and systems integrators that weren't incentive to bring them modern and fast and the best. Today, the government has now focused on buying commercial, scalable, interoperable, automated, modern technologies, and by also buying them from more players, modern players, next generation players, and those folks have really leapfrogged the primes. So it's a very exciting time to be an investor, especially with the tailwinds of acquisition reform, a large budget, bipartisan support for buying modern technologies that are good for our country.
So I love this and I believe it and I want to believe, but what about the argument that it's not really real, right? That acquisition reform has been tried 5 times before, it hasn't been successful before, the bureaucracy ultimately wins. There are those who say even in Secretary of War's Hedgeset's memo, his second memo, that it was basically the bureaucracy winning again and that he's telling a good story, but in reality, all the same entities are still there, all the people at the next level down, below the PEOs or at the PEO or whatever we're calling now PAEs, are are just going to keep their feet in the mud and wait this thing out?
So I can't speak to like the politics and the narrative. I can tell you that we're with the U.S. government customer 5 days a week. And never in 25 years have I seen a supermajority of military leaders and civilian leaders that really are driving for change. And it's the first time in a long time that folks want to engage and listen to audacious ideas and commercial ideas. They might not always agree with them. They want help and they want partnership from government, commercial industry, the investment community, the legacy contractors, but also like the new players.
I love that.
I'm very optimistic.
I love it.
Okay, Dmitri, we're going to turn to you now. We can't leave you silent. So you run Silverado. You help run Silverado. What do you Silverado works in issues like energy security, critical minerals, like things that are now
acquisition reform.
Acquisition reform.
Semiconductors.
Okay, everybody, everything, all these things. How have you seen, private sector engagement or leadership change since Silverado started? These are also critical areas where government support and focus is also really needed. How have you seen that also change?
Well, I've really seen everyone catch up. When we founded Silverado in 2020, we said initially we're going to focus on chips and critical minerals, and no one was talking about that issue. A year later, everyone started sort of saying, wait a second, these chips things, we've got a post-COVID supply chain issue. A year or so ago, it was critical minerals might be an issue.
You're like,
right?
We've got a dashboard for that.
So we feel like we've been out front on this early on. But coming back to the defense issue, which we were not early on, but this year we saw momentum in this administration really driving it, and we said, can we do a lot of work in the space? Talk to a lot of people at the contract officers, lawyers, other people involved in procurement to really try to understand where the issue is. And what I found is several things. One, it's mostly an incentive issue. Like most human problems. You change the incentives, human behavior changes. Mina knows this well. Investment field and sales, whatever. And the reason it failed 5 times is because we try to have Congress pass more authorities, pass more capabilities. I was literally at dinner last night with a very senior 3-star general. He said, we don't need any more authorities. We've got more authorities than we can use, and that we do use, because what's happening is that these contract officers inside the Department of War, but also other places, are not incentivized for speed. They're not incentivized for using commercial solutions. They're not incentivized for delivering capability that would actually meet the program officer requirements. And what they're mostly incentivized for is avoiding protests and making sure that they've got 5,000 pages of documentation that if there is a protest, they can go fight it.
Yeah,
and
it's risk aversion.
Yeah.
It's complete risk aversion. And what that results in is not just delays, but actually us oftentimes buying the wrong thing.
Right.
Because, I was talking to one particular organization that had enormous contract that they were working on for 3 years, still not done. Technology, of course, in the meantime has changed. You now have AI coming to the field. But they're so scared of changing the original RFP because it would add more years to the contract that they're literally afraid we're going to buy the wrong thing with taxpayer dollars after waiting 3 years, right? So we're literally ending up with solutions that we may not even need at this point or do not fill the need because of how long it takes. So what I believe passionately, I just wrote a piece in the Washington Post on this, is that we need to change the promotion structure and even potentially bonuses for these contract officers, procurement officers to incentivize speed, to incentivize satisfaction of the program office, and 3, to actually negotiate. That's a crazy idea, right? Mina and I know this in the private sector, you know this, Jamil. You go to a company and you say, I'm going to give you a huge contract, and I'm going to give it to you next month, within your quarter cycle. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to ask you for 20% discount. Every major company will do it in a heartbeat. The government doesn't do it. We overpay. Or we select the lowest bid vendor versus saying, you know what, this other vendor is actually better. I'm going to go to them and say, you're going to lose this contract. I'm going to go with the other guy unless you match the price. We don't do that either. It's insanity, right? So change the incentives, change the promotion structures, and you're going to achieve a lot. And by the way, one more thing on I think the biggest reason why you're seeing these folks like Andrew and other kind of new players in this field succeeding, and the biggest difference between them and the big primes is, you know what? The primes use government dollars for research. The primes use Mina's dollar. I mean, the new tech uses Mina's dollars for research, right? So it's actually a better risk-reward benefit to the taxpayer. In fact, I was just in a session with General Kane where he said we need to do more risk sharing from the government to the private sector. Well, this is how you do it. You put Mina's dollars and his investors' dollars at risk for potentially huge returns, and Paladin's and others, and mine. I'm co-invested in a few projects with Mina. And you get to move faster, you deliver new capabilities, you're not as risk averse, right? Why are the big primes risk averse? Well, because they're delivering what the government exactly wants. And they don't want failure, because then you end up on the front pages of the New York Times saying you wasted billions of dollars on a research project that didn't pan out. No one's going to write a story about a startup research project that didn't end up going the right way because they just lost investors' money.
See, I was going to ask, how do we incentivize risk? But you just answered it, and I need to do a plug for our advisory board member. Check out his latest op-ed in the Washington Post then.
Well, but let's talk about this whole risk-taking kind of culture, right? The ideas you've come up with and you've sort of pushed for, I think, make a lot of sense. But from what I hear, the department's actually not going to do that. They're gonna say you have to buy X amount from a non-prime contractor, right? That almost feels like a quota and creates the wrong incentives, right? I feel like the things you've talked about are the right way to do it. How much of those ideas do you think are going to get into the department, are actually going to make it happen there?
Well, I'm trying, but look, the quota thing, I get where people would be concerned about it, but you got to start moving the system. You got to reallocate dollars.
Don't get me wrong. I want them to buy from more new startups.
And if you have these contract officers doing a deal with some of these new tech companies and seeing that the sky is not falling, that they might actually get good publicity from it because it's working better, the warfighter is more satisfied, it's going to actually help drive some of those incentives. So you got to kickstart this ecosystem with that. I hope they go beyond that and start creating these promotion structural incentives. I'm trying to work within the government, on the Hill and the executive branch to try to push those ideas. Yeah. It's not that hard to do, and you don't need new legislation for it, which is really great, right? You just need to change how
the administration will love that.
Yeah, you just need to change how you set up the promotions for these folks.
Well, Mina, what about this whole question of the idea of fail fast, fail often, right? The thing that startups always want to do and that investors want them to do because they want them to get to the better product that has real product market fit and then scale that thing and not scale the thing that's going to fail. Why can't the government do that? I mean, we've done it before, right? Everyone always cites the space program as an example, right? But we've also seen, small units, JSOC, CIA, right, build really awesome capability by failing fast, failing often, and then it goes to big DoD or whatever, NRO, and they build out the big constellation. Why can't we do that, or can we do that? And are these new reforms a way of getting there?
I actually don't have a view on that.
Yeah. And in terms of the startups you're investing in, what is the sector you're most interested in, you think is the hottest right now?
Look, again, I don't know about hottest, but the sectors where the demand signals are super strong, where there's big administration priorities that intersect with big mission needs, and gaps where the legacy incumbents aren't delivering what we need for modern warfighting, those would include space, those would include cyber, those would include electronic warfare, and certainly that would include manufacturing. So those sectors are key focuses for us today.
Speaking at space,
Can I just add one thing? I have to correct myself. The op-ed in the Washington Post, I co-wrote with a great guy, Matt Cronin of Andreessen Horowitz and former China Committee member.
He doesn't want to get in trouble.
So
you're right with Matt Cronin and not me. What is happening right now? I don't even understand what we're doing here.
We'll do more together, but he contributed a lot of amazing ideas to the piece, so I want to make sure it's not just my piece, and that's recognized.
You guys might not see this. We're going to see like a blood contract signed in front of this camera soon between Dmitri and Jamil. Going back a little more to the space investments. Sure. What do you see? To you and the firm, why is that a core part of national security investment? Investing. What are some of the opportunities and challenges in that specific sector?
Sure. So we see the space domain as where the first conflict will be, or the next conflict will be either deterred, or it'll be begun, or it'll be won. And so we're just obsessed with answering the question, who is going to build the modern solutions and technologies that are going to enable the U.S. to sense what's happening, analyze what's happening, and then react faster than everybody else. Today, more than ever, it's a really hot and important topic. Every mission that the U.S. executes is literally connected to space and enabled by space. It is a very hotly contested warfighting domain, and as I was explaining earlier, the technology and the satellites and the infrastructure of the last 20 or 30 years weren't built for conflict. Mm-hmm. So we need new technology and new infrastructure and a modern space architecture that's ready for conflict, and that needs to be able to understand what's happening in space and what's friendly or foe and what are they doing and why are they doing it and what could happen next. Then you need faster decision loops, so you need automation of the space mission combined with humans in the loop so we can make decisions. And then we need a really modern, strong, resilient, ubiquitous ground station infrastructure, because if you can't control what's in space, it's useless. So these are the areas where we're focused, and we're deploying very deliberately and trying to help build the new modern space architecture in partnership with the U.S. government and other commercial partners.
So there's a big debate on the space architecture about whether we should be building it sort of with an offensive capability to push back, right, to deter, a defensive capability to protect our satellites, or just make it super resilient, operation responsive satellites, operation responsive launch. What's in your mind? Is it all the above, or is it really sort of the ORS construct? Just get more birds up there. If they come down, send more up. Fast, rapid refresh.
It's all of the above. Both a combination of offensive capability and defensive capability. I would call that full spectrum capability.
Okay, so the American public can only think, I think, sometimes in the short term. So thinking about, we've got regional wars, we've got U.S.-China tech competition. There's a lot on the plate to pay attention to, and now you've brought up potential conflict in space, which I think is not in everyone's roadmap right now. So one, a sense of the immediacy of that, and if from everybody, Dmitri, so you can also hand that back. And then when we think about tech competition, where do you see, both of you guys, see a mismatch between the conversation and where resources are being allocated? Is there a gap that we're just not talking about? Where are we maybe investing too much or over-investing, if we could?
Yeah, look, I can't speak to timing, but we're planning for ASAP. And we're planning that with our investments, with our portfolio companies, and our conversations with the government. We just have to be ready as soon as possible. In terms of allocation of resources, I'll tell you, we interact with the Space Force, Space Systems Command, the NGA, other agencies related to space. People are trying to create as much momentum as possible, and you're seeing that with programs like Golden Dome. So we're super bullish on people who are working super hard, even those who work 90 hours a week during the shutdown, to make sure we don't lose momentum in the space domain.
Yeah, look, we can't do anything these days without space, right? Between the comms, between the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, GPS, all of those assets, our sailors, until recently weren't even taught how to use celestial navigation anymore. It was all GPS driven, right? So we're going back to some of the basics, knowing that space may be degraded, may not be available for a period of time in a case of conflict. But it just underscores how vital it is. In Ukraine, of course, Starlink has been a game changer early on in the war. So
it wasn't.
Well, nowadays, unfortunately, it's actually becoming a game changer for the Russians, because they're buying terminals in Dubai and using them on the front lines. So it's still vitally important for both sides. It may have neutralized some of the advantages that the Ukrainians had early on, but this is why it's super important to win this race, and particularly in LEO, where low Earth orbit, where you had Starlink really revolutionize this idea that we're going to build not one huge school bus of a satellite that costs billions of dollars, but tiny satellites that we're going to have a very simplistic design on, right? We're not going to worry about refueling. We're not going to worry about survivability for years. It's going to be cheap, and we're going to deploy thousands of these things, in part because we now have this massive reusable lift capacity that dramatically lowered the cost of launch, and that's changing everything, right? And the fight for LEO is interesting because there's only actually so much space in low Earth orbit. Right, and if we get there first, between SpaceX and Kuiper and all the great companies in Mina's portfolio, before China does, we'll kind of own it by default, right? Because eventually you start having interference issues in that low Earth orbit. So getting there first and cornering that real estate is vitally important for both military but also commercial purposes. So huge believer in space like Mina, that this is just a vital domain that is finally getting a lot of attention from the government and a lot of experimentation that you didn't used to have, because it used to be like, we're going to design it, we're going to have Lockheed or whomever build it, and it's going to take 10 years. And now you're seeing dramatic changes to that. And space has always been critical to us. I mean, you look at how we revolutionized imagery, right? And the Keyhole program that is now public back in the 60s and so forth, that people have written about. Really, really interesting stuff that's happening there.
Okay, and another area that you've mentioned, heavy investing in cybersecurity. Common words to both, actually all three of you guys sitting here. So Jamil, maybe you can even answer as interviewee if you would like. Kind of the same question when it comes to the space sector investments, or you could talk a little broader because we've now AI-enabled cybersecurity is like the new phrase that we're using. What are some of the challenges, opportunities that you see coming down when it comes to cybersecurity? Well,
I'm sitting next to the godfather of cyber, and so I'll be very humble and brief in my comments. But
not on the record.
The situation is actually like an urgent one, and it's a pretty scary one. China outnumbers the U.S. in terms of hackers, for example, and cyber capability in the magnitude of 50 to 1, maybe even greater. They're also almost unhinged and unbridled in provoking the U.S. and in cyber attacks against our U.S. critical infrastructure, our government infrastructure, our commercial infrastructure. And so there's an asymmetry that we're trying to invest in to close that gap.
Mina and I earlier today were in a session where Admiral Papara spoke, and we were joking, we were sitting next to each other, that we should have had a drinking game about the number of times he had said the word cyber, which was pretty unprecedented. I've known Admiral Papara for a little while. He didn't used to talk much about cyber. He used to talk about other capabilities, autonomous capabilities, and literally almost like every other word from him was kinetic and not kinetic, cyber and cyber. And
so no driving after the Papara speech.
Yeah. We didn't have it, but we should have. We would have been on the floor. But just remarkable how important cyber is becoming to his thinking, certainly, but really to the rest of the military in this domain. The one, by the way, I'll answer your question. On the earlier question of which area is overhyped, and I actually think it's quantum. And I may get all the hate from your viewers afterwards. But look, quantum is a really important capability for cryptography, and National Security Agency really wants to invest in that to break foreign communications. Great stuff. There's a few areas in quantum sensing that are interesting, but literally, if I gave Jamil a quantum computer today, he wouldn't know what to do with it. Right? It has very few applications. No, it has, because look, people have been researching quantum algorithms, for decades, right? And the reason we know how to break cryptography, public key cryptography with quantum computers is because in 1994, Shor developed an algorithm for breaking, RSA and elliptic curve cryptography using quantum. So people have been focused on this issue for literally many decades. And there are only a few algorithms that they've developed in all this time that you could actually apply on a quantum computer. Now, maybe they'll develop others, but right now, this is an overhyped area, and you're actually seeing a lot of big companies, hyperscales and others that have been focused on quantum for a decade or more, redirecting most of those investments in AI because they appreciate that AI is here now. It is actually, I think, way more groundbreaking than quantum in terms of being able to apply to a whole slew of problems that you can't use a quantum computer for.
And quantum does always seem to be 10 years away.
Yeah, and look, I actually think we might accelerate the quantum timeline because of AI. And the problem with quantum research has been we've been stabbing in the dark. No one has even any idea of how to build stable qubits at scale. So they're doing all these experimentations, and it's perpetually 10 years away because you could stumble on something tomorrow, or you can stumble on something 50 years from now, and no one has any clue. So I think it will require AI really to help us figure out some of those breakthroughs and get them for a few national security purposes. Quantum sensing, I think, actually might be even more important than cryptography in submarines and navigations. But outside of that, it has actually very few applications.
You mean like the magnetic field type stuff?
Yeah, exactly. So, how do you, if you're building submarines, inertial navigation, in the GPS degraded environment, the radar as well. So some interesting applications for the military. But in commercial setting, it has almost no applications that are of any use. So I really don't understand why people are obsessed with quantum.
Okay, so we've talked about space. Dmitri, you mentioned you guys were, looking at semiconductors and critical minerals before that kind of became part of the larger conversation we're all having. What are the sectors or technologies that are going to be what you guys think are the next national security critical that are under discussed right now?
You should talk about critical minerals.
Sure. So, one of the major pain points that we have in the U.S. is that we gave all of our manufacturing away. So now we have to think about reclaiming that capacity and that know-how in order to have economic independence. One of the biggest choke points for manufacturing at scale are rare earth magnets. I think 96 to 98% of rare earth magnet production is controlled by China. So I'm very encouraged by recent developments where the Department of War and the Department of Commerce have backed a very innovative company called Vulcan Elements, who is going to rapidly manufacture rare earth magnets for U.S. commercial markets and defense markets.
I mean, who else backed that company?
The company is backed by a top-notch syndicate of trusted investors, including Washington Harbour Partners, who has priced, structured, and led their round. Thank you for asking. Another interesting area is, I'd say, durable, resilient, and portable energy, right? Moving away from the reliance of large, like diesel generators and other energy sources that actually result in a lot of deaths and injuries, and that are expensive and that are like hard to transport, and replacing those with small, micro, and modular nuclear versions that are like super durable and super safe. So we've spent a lot of time on the nuclear value chain. We backed a company called Radiant Nuclear that makes SMRs, and they're going to be the first to market in SMRs. And we also own a TRISO fuel manufacturer called Standard Nuclear.
Dmitri, you can't choose any of the answers that Mina did, so you gotta
pick a different.
Pick a different one.
Well, look, semiconductors obviously remains a big issue, and I think the one area that we've tried to change the conversation on chips at Silverado is advanced chips, really important, really vital for AI. We got to win that race against China. We've got to prevent China from having those chips. Some people call China hawks like myself un-American for trying to make sure that the People's Liberation Army does not get advanced chips. Well, some people do. And I absolutely reject that, and I think it's un-American to sell chips to companies that will help PLA build capability that will one day kill Americans. Absolutely outrageous that this isn't even a debate.
I'm going to predict what's coming next.
Large
format, but not legacy. Legacy is the wrong word.
That's right. Foundational
chips, yes,
are also vitally important because actually the vast majority of the chips we produce are not advanced chips. They're foundational chips, and virtually 98% of all chips going into our military systems, our weapon systems, are foundational chips. And China is running away with that capability. They're investing in it, they're subsidizing it, they're driving everyone else out of business by dumping. We've seen this playbook before. We've seen it with rare earths, we've seen it with solar, we've seen it with magnets, we've seen it with batteries. So we know what's coming if we don't address this problem rapidly. And can you imagine us not being able to build a single weapon system without buying chips from China and what that's going to mean to us? I mean, just absolutely huge vulnerability that we've got to address. And we're trying to change that conversation at Silverado, working with NSI and others. But it's a huge issue that I think not enough people are paying attention to.
All right, I don't do this, but since we've got 4 people in this pod, any last word from anyone? Do we not touch on anything? We've solved all the world's problems? We're good? Anyone? Okay, I think that means we've solved all the world's problems.
Well, I think there's one question that I have for Mina, is that if I'm an amazing founder that has just come up with the best defense tech technology, where do I go to get money?
We'd love to meet with you at Washington Harbour, regardless of your stage and regardless of whether it's a growth investment or a control investment. We just want to bring financial capital and smart strategic capital to solve these big market problems.
And add value.
And add a ton of value.
And if it's deep tech, cyber, AI, or the like, or defense tech,
Paladin. Look at that. We've covered all our...
Dmitri said it, just to be clear.
Dmitri covered everyone's bases. How about that?
And of course, Washington Harbour and Paladin will bring Dmitri Alperovitch into those deals to add even more value.
There you go.
Perfect. I think we can't promo anyone else anymore. So that's a wrap. Thank you so much to Mina and Dmitri. Thank you for joining us today on today's conversation. Thanks to Kelly Crowley, Ann Long, Claude Jennings, and the entire NSI team for helping produce today's episode. We have more live episodes from our RNDF, so continue listening in. And we're on YouTube. Check us our pod there. And if you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.
Thank you.